Up next is our fantastic conversation.
So, can you remember your gateway into horror movies, or maybe your earliest memory of being scared?
Yeah, very clearly. I think the first thing I saw, I always get the order of these two mixed up. But I think this is the correct order, or at least this order makes sense. I was already a Michael Jackson fan when I was about 2 or 3 years old, because it was around the time that Thriller came out. So there was the big, boom of it being the biggest selling album of all time. And I remember the hype of Channel 4 premiering the music video, the short film, the John Landis directed short, on Channel 4 on midnight. Not old enough to stay up, but my parents knew that I was a big fan, so they recorded it, and I became obsessed and watched it tirelessly. And it didn't scare me. I mean, I think at first it didn't really register to me that they were zombies or they were dead. I kind of got that they were monsters, but they were dancing with Michael Jackson, so they they must be harmless. And then I think it was about 6 months after that I saw we found the sell-through video, one of the very first sell-through videos to ever be released. It was something like 30 quid. My dad bought it in Brighton, and it had the making of on it, and I just became absolutely obsessed with it. And just realizing from a very, very young age, I was 3 years old, that that filmmaking was a job, and that people made monsters for a living. And that was the thing that really fascinated me. And then, of course, there's a very famous clip in the making of Thriller where Michael Jackson and John Landis discuss an American Werewolf in London. And that American Werewolf in London was Michael Jackson's gateway to wanting to make the Thriller music video. That he wanted John Landis and Rick Baker to turn him into a monster. And so that film kind of stayed in my periphery. And then I think it was, if I remember correctly, I should do, because I've made a documentary and written a book on it. The UK television premiere on BBC One was, I think, the 15th of February, 1985. And again, my parents recorded it. This is an American Werewolf in London, by the way. And I just was absolutely besotted by it, and it didn't scare me. I have a brother who's 7 years older than me. It terrified him, but I was just sitting there with this beaming grin on my face. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. The other really vivid memory I have was every Sunday night, my parents used to tape the puppet satire Spitting Image. When it was on its original run in the 80s. And it was about 1980, I want to say October 1986. And we were watching it on a Monday morning before school. And there was a television advert for A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. And I was like, what is this? And I became obsessed with this character of Freddy. Like I didn't even know Freddy Krueger. I just knew Freddy.
Yeah.
And and there's the epic moment from Elm Street 2 right at the end of the trailer. It's like, "You are all my children now," and then a stark voice at the end going, "Rated 18." And I was like, what does that mean? So I just became absolutely obsessed with this character that I knew nothing about beyond that TV spot. And then I think it was about 6 months later, I saw the video shop poster for Elm Street 2. And then I finally saw the film, became obsessed. And then it was like, Dad, take me to the video shop, take me to the horror section. And that was where the real love affair with horror movies really began.
Yeah, that was something I was going to ask. Were you a video shop kind of guy?
100%, 100%. We literally had 2 video stores. I used to live in Croydon in South London up until last year, and I've always lived in the same area. So the first house I was at was literally across the street from my primary school, and then we moved. There was like a park. My first house was on one side, and we literally moved to a house that was on the other side of the park. So always in the same area. But on this one stretch of main road, on the Brighton Road, there were 2 like old school mom and pop video shops. One was like an off license with a lovely Indian chap there who was curiously named Fred. Don't think that was his real name, but it worked for the 80s. And there was another place a little bit further down called Movie Town. And we had memberships to both. And my dad also there was a video shop. It was literally like 3 doors down from where he worked in Wallington. So we were members at all 3. So if there was a video you couldn't get one of them, you go to the other one, and that kind of stuff. And I used to get all the posters from them as well, because I'd go in there and be this cute kid obsessed with horror movies. So I was like there's no way they're not going to give the little kid the poster over, a teenager who's already listening to, Megadeth and Guns N' Roses at this point. So yeah, I was always in the video shops, always. And I knew that, like, even like age 5 and 6, I knew the days that the new releases came in, so that was the day you went. I remember getting Lost Boys, like the day it like came in the front their doors. So yeah, always spent time in the video stores.
I feel like that magic is kind of gone in a way, and every time someone talks about something like that or tells a story, I always get like super nostalgic. A lot of times with people who are so into horror and movies in general, they end up being collectors of something, whether it be books, comics, movies, props, etc. Were you ever a collector of anything growing up, and are you now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was unfortunate for my bank account. I kind of came to age at that point where, you're going to university and you're starting to get your own money. Around the time that the McFarlane Movie Maniac figures started coming out. So that was really poor timing, because I bought all of them. And I've just recently moved house, and I had a lot of my original McFarlane stuff still in boxes. And I just remember going through it, just thinking, my God, I bought some shit. It was like I just bought a load of stuff from movies that I didn't even like. But I just think then, I mean, I'm talking 2000. Well, the first lot I think came out in 98, 99. And then, I think between 98 and 2006, 2007 was really kind of like the horror collecting heyday in terms of McFarlane. You had Sota Toys, you had NECA, all these companies that were competing to get these licenses that no one else had made merchandise from before. So I literally was just buying anything just because I could, and that's not a good thing, and I don't advise it, but it was certainly the gateway to, the older. I mean, I'm 40 now, and for my 40th birthday present to myself, I bought an original production script from The Exorcist. So,
Nice.
Some things haven't changed. I am still collecting, nowhere near as the volume that I used to, but if you look at, if you look behind me, you can see that I still very much have a fondness for the genre that essentially gave me a career.
Is there anything in particular that now kind of, I guess, piques your interest more than something else? Is it more screen used, or rather than mainstream?
Not so much screen used. I mean, the most recent things I've bought. I mean, when I moved, I've literally only been in this office for barely 2 months after moving in. So it's been a carefully curated process, and I knew that this corner over here was going to be the Exorcist shrine. So really, it's like the shelf I've got in front of me. In the far corner, I've got like a Tim Burton's Batman thing, but Edward Scissorhands is in there as well because he counts. Then it kind of goes into a Spielberg section, which is not just the things from the movies that he's directed, but also Amblin, things that he's produced. And then on the very far end, I've got like a John Landis section. So yeah, it's kind of like finding things that complement these kind of curated sections I've got the Lost Boys above me here. I just bought a set of I don't know if you saw them on Instagram, a set of 1/6 scale figures that were privately commissioned. Only 3 sets of the 4 vampires were made.
Yeah.
And a wonderful guy, big Lost Boys fan, an actor who was actually in Queen of the Damned, Nate Hill, he commissioned all 3 of them, and he sold one of them to another collector, and then he had 2 sets. He had one set with the human heads, and then he had another set with the vampire heads. And he knew that I was a big fan. Well, he knew that I was a fan of the Lost Boys, having written a book, and he was a big fan of the book. So he got in touch with me. It's like, look, I'm thinking of selling the second set. It's like, do you want them? I was like, yes. So, and they literally arrived like 2 days ago, and you know, they look great. Really happy with them. So yeah, I do still buy stuff, but I'm also very much aware that I don't have a lot of space. So you know, it has to be something. Yeah, it has to be something that I will make room for, basically.
When I guess growing up, then you know, you were in the video shops a lot, watching a lot of these movies. Then you mentioned getting to university, you were buying all these figures, basically anything horror. At what point did you really decide that, you know, being in this world was something that you wanted to do as a career?
Okay, so that kind of started really well, tail end of high school, you know, going into college and then onto university. I knew that I wanted to work in movies, but you know, this was the late 90s, and I kind of felt that, you know, I didn't have that Richard Linklater or you know, the Wes Anderson motivation to go out and buy a camera and find people that wanted to do this stuff, you know, that I wanted to do. I went to college originally. I thought that I was going to be an actor, and I auditioned for a drama college, and it was just a really bizarre experience because when I turned up, everybody had monologues from like plays and novels, and I turn up and do a monologue from Pulp Fiction, you know, doing Samuel L. Jackson's character, which was also really strange. And suffice to say, I did not get in to that college, but you know, I then, you know, it was like, okay, well, what's plan B? I don't have a plan B. So I went to my local college and studied media studies and started to learn more about, you know, the business behind the camera. And you know, and it was after we had like a few creative projects that I realized that I kind of enjoyed writing and directing. So, but again, I didn't know anybody that I felt, you know, could give me an in to the business. So more than anything, I concentrated on the writing side of it. And this was around the time that the Exorcist was getting its 1998 cinema re-release. You know, I think it was like the 25th anniversary at that point, and Mark Kermode had done the Fear of God documentary, which had put a little bit of a spotlight back on it. So the BBFC like relented and released it for Halloween that year. And I'd seen that. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, again, going back to being a video shop kid, I'd seen The Exorcist at a point where I, you know, from an age standpoint, shouldn't have seen it, but also legally shouldn't have seen it. Because the one thing about going into mom and pop video stores is that after the Video Recordings Act was enforced in 1984 by the BBFC, which meant that all videos had to be classified by, I can't remember the exact date, but there was a deadline of early 1986. And then any movie that didn't have an official BBFC certificate was withdrawn from the shelves. You always had that place that had a copy of The Exorcist under the counter.
Yeah.
You know, and my guys were those people. So it was weird actually how I came to discover The Exorcist, because I was already reading Fangoria at that point. And I can remember the first issue I got, it was issue 60 from September 1986, and on the cover was Audrey 2's gaping wide open mouth from Little Shop of Horrors, and then they used to do the little sidebars with the film strips on the front covers, and in the top left-hand corner was a picture of demonic Reagan from The Exorcist. And I remember flicking through it and my dad just telling me that it was the scariest movie of all time, and I was 5 at this point. And that was genuinely probably one of the first times I actually got scared, because I remember I don't remember what the nightmare was, but I remember around that time where I had that magazine, I had a nightmare, and my parents' gut reaction to that was to take that magazine away from me and never let me see it again, and that The Exorcist was the cause of that. But of course, you know what it's like when someone tells you that you can't watch something, that just lights the fire, man. You have to see it. You have to see it. And the worst thing you can do is do that to a child, you know, because they are going to they will go above and beyond to see it. And so I saw a documentary called Hollywood Ghost Stories a couple of years after that. I'd forgotten about The Exorcist, but there was a segment in this documentary about whether or not the set was cursed, and there were clips from the movie in it, which I'd never seen before. And that was just like, right, I need to see this movie. And that was when we went to the video store, and the guy was like, well, yeah, I've got it here, but I'm not allowed to rent it to you, but I can let you borrow it as a friend. so that's how I got it. And I remember, well, if this isn't actually an official video, then surely I can use my Amstrad double decker and just make my own copy, which is what I did. And I watched the movie endlessly. And I think at that point, this was 1989. I saw The Exorcist, so I was 8 years old. I didn't understand the film at all. To me, it was just a special effects marvel that had a lot of people talking in between all the set pieces. Didn't understand what was going on, but I knew that what I saw I liked. So fast forward to 1998, and I'm watching this movie that I've seen countless times, but I'm watching it on a big screen. It's 10 a.m. on a Friday morning. There's nobody else in the cinema. I came out of that screening shaking. And it was like seeing the movie for the first time all over again. I don't know what happened. I'm not a religious person at all, but it had a profound effect on me that just made me think, hang on, maybe there is something beyond what we as human beings are told to rationalize and understand. And thinking that, if a movie can do that, wow, I want to bestow that kind of thought-provoking art onto other people. So that was really the catalyst that made me think, okay, I want to make movies, but how do I get there? So I started writing about movies. I started writing about The Exorcist and its impact 25 years on. And then I think after that it was like, oh, what else could I kind of talk about that's controversial and is in the same subject? I then discovered A Clockwork Orange and found a way of seeing that. I mean, this is before Kubrick's death and the movie was allowed to be released. Same thing with Straw Dogs, Last House on the Left. And there just became a theme where it was, and at the time it was like teaching your grandmother to suck eggs, like trying to collect the video nasties at the point where the BBFC were kind of starting to release them. You wouldn't think it, but the authorities were still being really shit hot on it at that point because the BBFC was still hesitant to release a lot of them uncut. So there was like eagle eyes on, tape trading, and especially with the video nasties and stuff like that. So that kind of got me work as a journalist, kind of writing about these things. And, it was the like the twilight of the horror websites and stuff like that. And as we spoke about before we came on air, I then figured, well, there's no one in the UK that's kind of doing what it was Creature Corner at the time, before it was Dread Central, Creature Corner, Bloody Disgusting, Arrow in the Head. There was no one in the UK that was kind of doing the same thing. So I made a website called Celluloid Shockers, which was a UK equivalent of like Bloody Disgusting. And I did it for about it was about a year. I think it was about a year. From like 2002, 2003, I ran this website. And I was kind of taking contributions from other writers, like in good faith, because I didn't really there was no ad revenue or anything coming in. So I did it for as long as I could on my own. And then the website sadly kind of died a death. But I kind of wish I'd kept doing it, because I really did go way over the top for one person running a website. But I guess back then it kind of showed the passion that I had for the genre, and it kind of led to what it eventually led to.
Yeah, because you done stuff with Horror Hound as well, didn't you?
They were the first magazine to actually pay me.
How did that whole relationship come about? Because I feel like I get this question a lot. When people ask me to ask different kinds of people, advice about trying to get into this type of industry. And while I feel like horror is definitely big business now, I think it still seems it's like a very unique place to try and get into the inner workings, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was, like I said, the advent of websites and forums and all that kind of stuff. And like I mentioned, I was a big fan of the Movie Maniacs figures, so I needed like an online hub where I could find out the news, what was the rumors of what the next figures were going to be. And there was a moviemaniacs.net, and their forum is where I met Nate Heineman, who was already writing for Tomar Action Figure Digest at that point. And we got chatting, and he spoke about doing his own, his dream was to do his own horror magazine. So I was there at the genesis of that, and because I was the token Brit, he's like, if we've got anything overseas, you can do it for us. And I think my first assignment was on Horror Hound issue 2, which is way back in 2006. It was I think it was the cover with the Shaun of the Dead action figure on the cover. And my first task was to interview Warwick Davis, because at the time there was a very limited edition Leprechaun figure that was going to be released. I don't think it ever saw the light of day. But Nate had given me a bunch of questions that he wanted Warwick Davis to address, and then I threw a couple in there, just talk about the Leprechaun series on a broader scale. And it was funny because it was over the phone, and he was in the car. It was during Panto season, and he was just coming home from doing a pantomime. So he was you could tell he was very, very tired, but he was absolutely lovely. And I've met him a couple of times since. He's a really nice guy. But we spoke about other things as well. There was a movie that he was doing that was directed by, I'm trying to remember the title of it. It's escaped me, but it was directed by Gabe Bartolos, who is a very accomplished makeup artist. Do you know the one I mean? Don't you?
I know you're. I know exactly what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, and I think that he appreciated the fact that I brought that movie up, and didn't just concentrate on all the things that he's most known as. So I think I got in his good graces there, and I specifically asked him about that first before we started talking about Leprechaun and other things, so that it would open him up a bit more. He would be a little bit more relaxed talking about Leprechaun. So that was my first thing for Horror Hound, and then. Quite naturally, the Video Nasties thing came back, because I told them they were aware of my obsession with it a few years before. So I did a whole guide to the Video Nasties in issue 3. But then the big one was issue 5, when they said, "Look, 25th anniversary of An American Werewolf in London. You're a British guy. Do you want to do a huge retrospective on it?" And I said, yeah, because, at this point, I don't think I've seen the movie in a long time, but it's definitely a movie that's kind of followed me throughout my, the different stages of my life, because I think you see the movie. I definitely saw it differently from when I was a kid to when I was a teenager. You definitely pay attention to Jenny Agutter a lot more when you're a teenager watching that movie. And then as an adult, the sense of humor, and the dry sense of humor, and the morbid sense of humor that it has, just kind of shown through a lot more. So I was more than happy to do it. But then I started researching it, and I just could not find any decent reference materials. Like I went back to like Fangoria's from 1981. And I was reading interviews, but I didn't want all of my sources to be from 25-year-old interviews. Yeah. And the DVD at that point had like an interview with John Landis and an interview with Rick Baker, and that was kind of it. So I reached out to a couple of people. I knew someone who was repping David Norton on the convention circuit. So, as you did back in those days, I sent like questions over email, and I've told David this since, and he was profusely apologetic, but I still bust his balls about it. When I got his responses back, they were like one sentence. It was like, was being, I was a lot younger, was being an American Werewolf a memorable experience? Did you think at the time you were making something special? No. It's like one word answers. I was like, well, I can't quote this in the article.
Yeah.
So at that point, I don't know what happened, but it's like a light bulb just went off, and I just seen Halloween 25 Years of Terror, which he hates me mentioning it, but my very, very dear friend who went on to become one of my co-writers, Steph Hutchinson, who's written some of the best Halloween comics that exist. He directed 25 Years of Terror, and I'd just seen it. And I think at this point as well, I'd heard of a fan-made Jaws documentary that was in the works. The Shark's still working. And there was also Robert DeLuzzo, who was doing a Psycho documentary at the same time. So I was like, well, if these guys are doing it, you know, an American Werewolf in London was made in the UK. I practically have access to London, all the locations. Probably 80% of the cast are still here. Cast and crew are still in the country. So I don't know what madness kind of set it off, but I remember about a week after I had this idea, I went to a convention in Manchester when Collectomania was still doing the Manchester conventions, and I met a filmmaker called Anthony Bueno, who was studying at London Film School, something like that, or he was a graduate of the New York Film School, New York Film Academy, even. And we got talking. We were having a few drinks in at this point, and we got talking about documentaries, and then we got talking about An American Werewolf in London. And I just brazenly asked him, you know, if he was a fan of the film. He was like, yeah. And he dropped into conversation that he had his own editing equipment, he had his own camera, he had his own lights. So it's kind of like, don't let this guy escape. You know. So I asked him, I was like, would you have any interest in making the documentary yourself? He's like, of course. And I was like, well, I've got this idea to do a documentary on An American Werewolf in London. You know, would you be interested? And he was like, fuck yeah. So I don't know what happened in the space between blacking out that night and a couple of days later, but the next thing I know, we'd scheduled an interview with Jenny Agutter, who was currently starring in Equus with Daniel Radcliffe on the West End. And yeah, I just bullshitted an email off to her agent, said, it's going to be on Channel 4, it's going to be on the DVD, you know, will you be in this? And I got a reply back saying, yeah, she'd love to. I was like, shit, we actually have to do this now. So once I got that first one through, I was just like, fuck it. And I just emailed all the agents, all the contacts, all the cast and crew that I could find. And this is before I'd even contemplated contacting John Landis. You know, I kind of felt like to legitimize the project, we should at least get some of these interviews in the can so that I could actually show him what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We interviewed about 5 or 6 people. Jenny Agutter was the first one. Then we got Robert Painter, who's the legendary director of photography on the film. David Schofield, You Made Me Miss. John Woodvine, who played Dr. Hirsch. Brenda Cavendish, who's Judith Brown's the happy, chirpy dead girl in the cinema sequence. And yeah, we had this little reel that we cut together, and then I finally got the balls to email John Landis, and I actually went through every horror person's best friend, Mick Garris, who I'd had some contact with through Horror Hound, and I knew that Mick and John were very, very close. So I'd written an email, and I just emailed Mick and said, could you please forward this on to Mr. Landis? And Mick, as lovely as he is, you know, he replied straight away saying, yep, I'll forward it. No guarantees if you get a reply, though. I was like, no, that's fine. And then literally a day later, Landis's name pops up in my email, and the rest is history on that. You know, we showed him this little thing, and he was very flattered that these kids from the UK wanted to do it, because I think I was just 25, 26 at the time. But he was like, you don't own the rights to this. What are you going to do with it? You know, Universal owned the movie. You can't put clips from the film in it if you don't own it. And I just said, we'll figure it out. Which later on I found out that that's actually the moment that endeared me to him, because he said that the attitude from the British cast and crew on An American Werewolf in London was very much, it'll be all right on the day, governor. So I kind of reminded him of what it was like working with a British crew for the first time. But he said originally, look, I'm think this is a wonderful idea and I wish you all the best, but unless you get permission from Universal, I'm afraid I can't help you. So I called up the licensing department at Universal and I said, look, I'm making a documentary on the making of American Werewolf in London. And then I pulled a figure out of my ass. I just said, look, how much would it cost me to license 18 minutes of footage from the film? And this woman came back to me and said, oh, that'll be $632,000. I was like, okay, so that's the end of that. And this woman was like, well, what is it that you're doing? And I was like, well, like I said, I'm making a feature-length retrospective documentary on the making of American Werewolf in London. I've got like 20 guaranteed interviews from the original cast. And she was like, what, on home video, I don't want this? And I was like, well, I'd already been in touch with the people who ran home video at this point. They just said outright, no. That's why I ended up calling the licensing department to see if there was a workaround. And I said to her, well, evidently not. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And she was like, okay, give me your email address and give me 30 minutes. And I just thought it was the most polite shit sandwich I'd ever been served in my life. I didn't think I was going to hear from her again, And then lo and behold, 30 minutes later, I got an email from this. And I wish I remembered her name, because the movie would not exist without her. I would not have a career if it was not for this lady. But she emailed me with an address and said, send it here when it's finished. And I was just like, what the fuck just happened? I was like, what the fuck just happened? So I didn't even write anything in it. I just hit forward and put John's email address in there and just sent it. And then he emailed me 15 minutes later saying, I'm going to be in London in 2 weeks. And we met him. We showed him the 5-minute clip that we put together. And he literally turned to us, and this is in his hotel in London. He was over for a sci-fi thing that was doing a retrospective, and I think they showed an American Werewolf in London. And we were in like this little cafe in the hotel that he was staying with in Russell Square. And he just turned to us and said, this is gold. Like, there's absolutely no way that Universal are going to say no to this. And he was like, how can I help? And we're like, well, we don't have Rick Baker. We don't have David Norton. We don't have Griffin Dunn. So he then kind of assembled the US side of everybody that we needed to interview. And I think it was like 3 months later, we were, first time I'd ever gone to LA. We were on, we arrived in Los Angeles. First day, we're at Rick Baker's Cinovation Studios before it got shut down, seeing all the stuff that he had there, Bigfoot and the Hendersons, Coming to America, The Nutty Professor. He had like a little museum of all this really cool stuff. And just sitting there and meeting the guy that, turned Michael Jackson into a monster. It's like the 3-year-old in me was going nuts. And even meeting John for the first time, he's like a human tornado. He came out, this is when he was in London. He was like, is Paul Davis, like auditorium full of people. It's like, is Paul Davis here? It's like looking like through the floodlights. It's like, everybody go to Paul Davis's MySpace page. He's making a documentary on American Werewolf in London. He's nuts, but it's great. You should go and look at it. And I'm just kind of like shitting myself that one of my filmmaking heroes just called me out on stage. But yeah, we shot and edited that entire documentary in the best part of a year. It's 2007. And then John said the hard part is going to be getting it released, because it's all very well and good that Universal have given you their that they haven't shut you down at this point and they're not suing you, but that doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it. And he kept my expectations like bottom of the barrel, throughout the entire process. And I just remember getting a call from him the summer of 2008. And it was weird that he called me, because it was always emails, but he called me on this occasion. It's going to be on the Blu-ray. I was like, what? How did that happen? It's like, I took the disc into Ned Tannen's office at Universal. I said, put that on the Blu-ray. I was like, okay. So my expectations didn't need to be as low as they were. Yeah, but at least you're not disappointed. I was like, no, I'm fucking ecstatic. So that's how that happened. That's how Beware the Moon happened. And that's how I got a career in film, seemingly out of nothing.
Do you think some of the key to achieving something like that is being, I guess, bold and brazen enough to actually...
Yeah, 100%. Otherwise it wouldn't have happened. You know, the reason that it happened is because I lied to all of these fucking people. You know, but it worked out. You know, it wasn't a complete lie. It ended up on the Blu-ray, which was one of the things that I said. You know, and we were actually, while we were doing the interviews, I did say, well, you know, we should do a version that we can offer for television, kind of like in the same way that Fear of Mark Kermode's Exorcist documentary started out as a BBC thing, and then Warner Brothers had it for the DVD and Blu-ray. So we were interviewing people like Justin Lee Collins and Edgar Wright, and I'd set up interviews with Joe Cornish, you know, like fans of the movie, so that we could intercut their stuff into it as well. But by the time, I think we did 2 interviews with Justin Lee Collins and Edgar Wright, they were both the beginning of the summer of 2008, and that was at the point that Universal bought it and said, stop production, you know, don't do any more. What we've seen is what it should be, and that was just the cast and crew only version. So I felt terrible because we did this wonderful interview with Edgar Wright, and we couldn't use it. I think we ended up using it for promotion because it was 2009 that it actually finally came out. The Blu-ray was being released, and I was always a big fan of Fright Fest in London, and I felt that it was a good opportunity to maybe get something screened there. So I begged Universal to reach out to the guys at Fright Fest, and they said yes immediately. And I got to meet those guys, and you know, I'm still friends with them today. It's one of the greatest relationships that I treasure. All those guys from Fright Fest, because they, you know, everything that I kind of did subsequently, they championed, and they you know, always said that there would be a screen for my work if I ever created anything. I mean, obviously they'd have to make sure that it wasn't complete shit beforehand, but they'd say, you know, if it's good, we'll show it. And they stuck to their word, and every movie that I've made has played at some kind of Fright Fest screening.
That's such a mind-blowing story to hear you tell it like that, you know, to kind of I guess come up with this at its early stages, at this like crazy idea, and then kind of, I don't want to say bluff, but you're kind of putting it out there. And it literally did start out as a bluff, and then, you know, once you get a couple of interviews under your belt, it's like, shit, okay, we have to make this now. So, but yeah, no, it definitely started out as a bluff, but it's, you know, I started as I then carried on, because I kind of feel like everything I've made since, I mean, probably not so much the Blumhouse movies, because they're part of a more controlled, bigger machine, but definitely the 2 short films that I made afterwards were off of the same, you know, chaotic energy that Beware the Moon was born out of. Yeah, well, I was just going to quickly ask about him indoors and stuff like that. Where did the concept for that come, or where do you get is it something like you sit down and try and curate a story, or is it a case of like everyday life, you might see something and think, A little bit of both. I mean, sorry, I'm just going to put some of the lights on behind me now, because it's starting to get a little bit dim. At least put my LEDs on. There we go, that's a bit better. Him Indoors was a story that I'd been gestating since my university days. So we're going back 2000, 2001. I was a big fan of the 90s BBC sitcom Game On, in which it was a flat share sitcom, and one of the characters was agoraphobic. And I don't know why, my brain just immediately went, wouldn't it be great? Or no, not necessarily would it be great. That's definitely not the phrase to use. How would an agoraphobic serial killer operate if they can't, you know, leave their home? Or, you know, how, you know, everybody obviously has to come to them. So you start thinking pizza deliveries, postman, all that kind of stuff. And that idea always kind of tickled me. And I had met Reece Shearsmith at a BFI event for the launch of John Landis's
DK book, Monsters in the Movies, which was 2010, 2011. And I think the BFI did a screening of Island of Lost Souls, but right before that, John did it was in conversation between Reece Shearsmith and John, and then we all skipped the movie and went to dinner, and I met Reece for the first time, and I kind of told him the very, very basic idea of an agoraphobic serial killer, and being a huge fan of League of Gentlemen and Psychoville was very recent to that point as well. I kind of figured that he would kind of be the perfect fit for it. So I think it was about 3 weeks later, I mentioned it to Reece. And he said, well, if you write it and it's cool, then yeah, I'll do it. And I just done a short film where I was playing a monster. I was playing like a Michael Myers type masked killer character. And got to know one of the producers on that, and he said to me, and he was a young guy, he was younger than me, I think he was like 20, 21, but he had that same kind of get up and go that I recognized from when I did Beware the Moon. So I was like, I want to work with this kid, he's got a good future. So and he said, if you come up with anything, let me know. So I told him the idea, and I said that Reece was probably interested. So he's like, yeah, no, it sounds good, have you written it? I was like, no. So I went home that weekend, and I wrote it on a Sunday. I wrote it in 3 hours, just sat down and I had the basic ideas. And I just watched, which I just rewatched recently as well. I've been doing Brian De Palma's entire filmography in chronological order. But I just watched, prior to that weekend of writing the script, Sisters with Margot Kidder. And I just remembered the wonderful sequence in which you've got the police coming upstairs with Deborah Salt's character, who's witnessed the murder, and they've hidden the body in the sofa bed. Mm-hmm. And I just loved the ticking time bomb of the split screen of will they clean it up in time to them coming up to the apartment. And I was like, well, I can't really do that, but what's the next best thing? So, the idea of an agoraphobic serial killer who's got a pizza delivery guy and then gets interrupted and has to dispose of the body very, very quickly, having a sofa bed just lent itself very very nicely to that scenario. So that was kind of the idea. So I knew that it was him getting interrupted, has to deal with the body that he's currently working on at that point, and then has to deal with the situation with Pollyanna McIntosh after that. Mm-hmm. And it was actually Reece Shearsmith who emailed me, because I was telling him kind of the basic story, and he was like, well, surely he wants to get caught. I was like, that's fucking genius. Yeah, of course.
I was blown away. I was actually genuinely, and I suppose much like yourself, when you watch so many different movies, so many different things, a lot of times I feel like I already know, or I already have an idea of oh yeah, this is kind of the beats we're going to hit here. And that left me
that was the thing. Yeah. But that was Reece. That's the genius of Reece Shearsmith. He was the one who said that. And I was like, of course he fucking wants to get caught. That's brilliant. So as soon as I had that, I just sat down and I wrote the script in 3 hours, and that was what we shot. We shot that first draft that was done in barely an afternoon. But the big thing with this story and him indoors, and the thing that I still, it's more fascinating to me than doing Beware the Moon, how we made Beware the Moon. And it, at the time, it kind of felt like the next step up to what we'd done with Beware the Moon and how we got that made, was that we were really pushing it. So we shot it during the 2012 Summer Olympics in London, mm-hmm. which was, I think it was July. And I got in touch with the guys at Fright Fest, and I took them up on their offer. I was like, look, I'm making a short film. I know it's July and you've already announced your short film program, but if you give me any kind of inkling that there's a chance that we can screen this at the festival at the end of August, I will get that movie ready. I will shoot it. I will edit it. I will have it mastered for you to show on that screen on Bank Holiday weekend. And they were like, if you can do it, we'll just make it a surprise afterwards. They were like, just don't make it 20 minutes long. Because, you know, I was like, no, it's 10 minutes. That's it. And they're like, great. So we did, we now needed the money to make it because we knew it was going to be at least a $5,000 film because we wanted to make it properly. I wanted to give it some production value, despite the fact that it was literally people in a room talking, throughout. So we did, I was very hesitant to do it and I'd never do it again, but it worked for this. We did like a Kickstarter campaign for it. And we offered like some of the perks, like signed scripts by Reece Smith. And I think our biggest prize that we, or investment perk, was we let 2 people come and hang out on the set and meet Reece and Pollyanna McIntosh. But that was the thing also with Pollyanna McIntosh, because I was a huge fan of The Woman, which I'd seen at Fright Fest the previous year. And I'd actually worked with her. I'd worked with both her and Reece, actually. I had a very, very tiny part in John Landis's last film, Burke and Hare, with Simon Pegg and Andy Serkis. Because of my height, I'm 6'8". John thought it would be hilarious to have me in one of the opening scenes where a character is getting his leg amputated by Tim Curry. So he was like, we'll bring you down to size. It'd be great. And I didn't say no because I got to work with fucking Pennywise. So I first met Reece and Pollyanna on that. I met them at the wrap party, but I'd actually met Pollyanna. We were looping dialogue on Burke and Hare on the same day. Mm-hmm. So we met very, very briefly there. But she was a huge fan of Reece and a huge fan of League of Gentlemen. And I remembered hearing this somewhere. So I was like, let's send it to Polly. And the producer was like, yeah, but Reece, like you had the John Landis thing, and I think it's up his alley. But Polly's a professional. I was like, well, so fucking Reece Smith. But we sent it to our agent, and yeah, she'd love to do it. So that's how we got Polly. And then David Schofield from An American Werewolf in London, because I wanted to have an American Werewolf connection to my first narrative piece. He was the voice of the judge at the very end. So, and I figured because David Schofield had a line in An American Werewolf in London, "You made me miss," that kind of lended itself to being a vocal role. So he came in and did it. Just came in 5 minutes, one take, boom, out. See you later. Yeah, we made it in 6 weeks. We raised the money. Well, from the day I mentioned it to Reece, to us having the screening at Fright Fest was 6 weeks. And I've never worked more tirelessly in my life. But it was a very, very valuable experience. I mean, it's my first time working with actors, first time working with like a proper DOP, and I edited the film myself, but I wanted to do that because I felt that would be a very valuable lesson in terms of pacing and coverage, and because you always know what you're missing from your shots when you're sitting there and editing it, so I figured that would be a very, very valuable lesson. And yeah, we made the movie and it screened, and it went on to tons of other film festivals after that, and then that landed me the body.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, so that must have been all a whirlwind. And then to follow that up with the body, which again, if anybody hasn't seen that, like, it's another one of those where you're just enthralled in the story. I guess from the original making of the short to go from there then to being a segment on Patient 7.
Which I had nothing to do with, by the way.
Right.
Patient 7 is not a movie that I endorse having on my IMDb credits, because essentially, I mean, I don't know if anybody knows what Patient 7 was, because that was one of the things that really pissed me off when the feature version came out. Loads of people on Twitter and the comment sections of whatever are going, "Oh, this is a rip-off of that bit from Patient 7." I was like, no, it's not. Patient 7 was a movie where they'd essentially shot a wraparound to fit. How many shorts are there? There are 4 in it, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
They basically licensed 4 existing short films
Right.
and then built and then shot a wraparound. So the wraparound was the only thing that they filmed. Everything else were pre-existing movies, and the body was one of those. And it's one of the decisions that my producer on that made that I'm still not thrilled about. But you can't change the past. But I'm still really happy with the short film. I mean, again, that was one of those things where we felt that the script was so good that we didn't really need to go and ask for favors to get it made. And again, this was a rare occasion where the producer, Paul Fisher, who'd written the original script, because the concept came from him and I think it was an ex-girlfriend at the time, a work colleague. They were working on a documentary project. They were watching Shallow Grave, and the sequence where they're trying to get Keith Allen's body out of the flat, they kind of both turn to each other and say, do you think somebody would get away with that on Halloween if people just thought it was a costume? So that was the genesis of it. And then Paul had written the original first draft of the short, which was the most ambitious thing I'd ever read. I think it was 20 minutes long. No, it must have been longer than that, because the one that we shot was about 17. So, but anyway, it was a lot longer. And the entire third portion, of the final third, took place in a fun fair. And I read that and I was like, well, this alone is like twice the budget of him indoors. So I asked him, I was like, is there money to make this? He's like, yeah. I was like, how much? He's like, about 10 grand. I was like, well, that's your fairground sequence is 10 grand. I was like, look, the one thing that I was like, I really like the concept. I really like the party sequence, but the point where they leave and they end up in this fairground, and then it all becomes a commentary on how modern society are actually more fucked up than this sicko. That was the original intention for the body. But what I took from it, what tickled me, was the idea that we are so sophisticated as human beings now with the way that technology moves and our keenness to keep up with it, that if someone was dragging a real body through the street, there's just absolutely no way that you would believe it. There has to be some kind of curtain to pull away, to peek behind, but it's not, and it's really just showing our own blindness to, a lot of the atrocities that are actually going on right underneath our noses. So I made it a lot more political in that essence. But I said to him, let me rewrite the last act, because the other thing that really annoys me is that if this guy is really as brazen and as good as he thinks he is, that he can just carry a body through the street, I want to see what this guy can fucking do. So I wrote all the kills and all that kind of stuff in there. And it's still one of my favorite shots I've ever done. It was the Steadicam shot where Alfie Allen, who played the killer, comes back into the forest, and it's all done in one shot. We're just following him in the Steadicam, and he picks up the hatchet and he hands it to Jack Gordon. He's like, feel the weight on this. And he's like, oh yeah, it's really got some clout to it. And then he hands it back and he just throws it into the guy's head. I'd envisioned that shot as I wrote it as being like the Mexican standoff from Reservoir Dogs. I wanted it to be that triangle. And I knew that the shot would only work without any cutaways, from the moment he enters the frame to the little conversation to the throw. And then we just rotoscoped a CGI axe into the guy's head, and his reaction as he puts out hand goes, mate, and then just stiffly falls backwards in a very Laurel and Hardy-esque moment, which I loved. That's still one of my favorite shots. We tried to replicate it in the Blumhouse remake, the feature, but we didn't have the space in the room. Working in that room, I'll get onto that in a minute, but that was the worst 3 days I've ever experienced on a movie. But no, we intended to shoot a lot more on the body as well, on the short. But we got rained off that night in the forest. We got rained off. We cut for lunch, and we were setting up which is why if you go back and watch it, although I don't think you can go back and watch it. Oh no, it's in Patient 7. Okay, that's the only way you can see it now, through Patient 7. So I guess it is a good thing that that exists, because Blumhouse ended up buying the short and you can't really watch it as a standalone thing anymore. But if you watch it, you'll notice that there's no cutaways or coverage to Christian Brassington's character when he falls, when they're having their little tussle at the end and he falls backwards. Camera stays on him. And I remember like people saying to me, it's like, oh, that was great, because that kind of put us in the moment, being there and, you know, wondering what he was going to do and being put in the victim's shoes. I was like, great. The reason it's like that is because we couldn't shoot fucking reverse angle, because we got rained off. Because the first thing we set up the shot, it's the one shot out of all the things we got rained off on. I could have done with like not doing the reverse angles, because that actually worked out to our benefit. But the shot that we'd set up so that when we came back from lunch we could film was almost a voyeuristic POV shot from behind a bush. That it was a long shot, so it kind of had Alfie in silhouette. You had the fire just to the left hand side of him, and you could only see Christian's feet upwards from where he was on the floor, and like his shoulders, because we built a ditch and we'd actually put him in the ditch so that he was out of frame, and we had a prosthetic head on a fishing wire, so when Alfie slammed the shovel down, the head, you just see the silhouette of the head roll off, you know. But we didn't get to shoot it. We set it all up, but as soon as we came back, the heavens opened up, and that was the end of that night. But there was loads of dialogue stuff that we were supposed to shoot there, that included more of Hannah Toynton's character. You know, we were literally left with no other choice but to have her stay in the car asleep, because the shot where he pulls out the hatchet, where she's asleep, and you just see that the dolly shot tilt down to the hatchet, and you see him pull it out. That was supposed to happen later in the film. Right. So they had this whole scene where they're around the campfire talking. She gets tired and he takes her back to the car, and then he brings the hatchet out and kills them all and comes back. But we didn't shoot any of the dialogue stuff because we couldn't. So we just did some ADR work where he says stay in the car and she yawns, okay, and then we just cut to the shot that we'd already shot of her already asleep in the car. So as much as I hated it when we were editing it, because I was praying for Paul Fisher to get us the money to go and reshoot that stuff, because I felt like we needed it. But Paul's a brilliant writer. He's a really, really good writer. So he was like, well, what if we just get them to ADR these lines as a fix? And thankfully, the way I'd shot it, all of the ADR stuff is backs to camera, so you can't see that that they're not actually saying it. So I'd kind of done myself a favor in the way that I blocked out those shots. But I really wasn't happy with the finished film. And again, this was one that Fright Fest had way in advance, and they'd seen like an unfinished version and agreed to screen it like almost 6 months before the festival, because I think we shot it in November 2012, and then it didn't screen until August 2013. So we had a lot of post-production on that one. And I was never happy with it. And then it got accepted into Fantastic Fest, and then it got accepted into Sitges, and I was like, I'm clearly wrong on my opinion on this one then. If other people love it, great, I'll just ride the wave. But it ended up playing, I think, something like 50 festivals around the world, and then the year later won the Best European Short Film at the Sitges Film Festival. And I was just like, had I known that it was in competition, I would have gone to accept the award. But I was DJing in a dingy club in Wimbledon at the time.
I can see why though. It's one of those shorts I think is for as much coverage as it's gotten, which is fantastic. I still think it's still underappreciated. I think just the whole idea, the concept, how it's shot, everything about it is I don't know, it's just so clever. It's so especially in a more modern day world, I think things can become very dime a dozen, and it just has something that sets it apart from. And like you said, it's kind of it's a simple idea, but it's also not. There's
Right.
a lot of, it's like the iceberg. You can see that tiny tip where you'd be like, okay, yeah, I can kind of get the idea of the beat, but then there's so much under the surface that's going on there. I think that makes it great.
Yeah, I mean, I would never compare anything that I've done to any kind of worthwhile horror film, but I always feel as though the best horror movies are never made by horror filmmakers, or they're never made to be horror movies. The Exorcist, William Friedkin will always say supernatural detective story. Richard Donner always referred to The Omen as a thriller.
Mm-hmm.
Rosemary's Baby was not made to be a horror film, or Dawn of the Dead, while yes, it very much is a horror film, but it's got those layers that really make it about something else.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why Shaun of the Dead got it so right, because they really took they understood the Romero logic of, the human characters and the human story is, well, the human element is the story, the zombies are plot, and that goes throughout, at least, night, dawn, and day. And Shaun did it brilliantly. It's a romantic comedy with zombies, and that's why that movie works so brilliantly. But I did the same thing. When I was discussing with Evan Bolter, who just did, his careers, he was my DOP on both Him Indoors and The Body, the short. His career's gone from strength to strength. He did is it Avenue 5, the Hugh Laurie HBO space show for it? He shot that. I can't remember what it's called, but he shot that. He just did Night Teeth for Netflix, which looks absolutely gorgeous. So I can't afford him anymore. His career's like way out there. But I said to him when we first started shooting it, he was like, do you want it to look like, old school Dean Cundy Halloween John Carpenter? And I was like, no, I want it to look like a Harry Potter film. It's like I want it to have I want the dark colors to be vibrant. I almost want it to look like your LEDs as they're changing in the background right there. That was how I wanted the blues to look. That's how I wanted the oranges to look. Yeah. I said I want it to look almost theatrically over the top Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have that in the UK. So let's just really, let's really go heavy on the, those autumn earthy colors. And, I want the blues to be, deep royal blue. But yeah, I gave him still images from like Harry Potter movies and said, yeah, make it look like this. And so again, I wasn't really thinking horror, and I don't think of either Him Indoors or The Body as horror movies. They're comedies. I just have a really fucked up sense of humor.
You can see that. If you could write or direct something within an existing IP, is there something that really sticks out for you, or something that's like you would like to be involved in?
I've pitched for several existing IPs. A couple of years ago, I pitched a Lost Boys sequel / reboot. My thinking was that you could just Force Awakens the original. You can bring back the living original cast and then pass it off to a new generation of characters. And they're now doing the remake with gentleman who did I'm Not Okay With This, which I loved, and I think he'll do a great job. And that's one of the things I get asked about a lot, because I did the Lost Boys book. People ask me my opinion on the remake, and I was like, look, it's not made for a 40-year-old white guy from London. I'd be very worried if it was. Mm-hmm. We've got our version, and we've got the version that we grew up with, and that's never going to go away. I think that, you know, we should embrace the fact that, you know, younger generations can discover these IPs that we got to enjoy, you know, but with their own heroes, you know, because it's the kids from A Quiet Place and It, and, you know, and they'll do a great job, and he'll do it. The guy who's making it will do a great job, and it's not going to tarnish Joel Schumacher's movie in any way, shape, or form, because if you know the history of the Lost Boys, it very much could have ended up like the version that they are doing now, which seems to be a little bit younger. But it was Joel Schumacher who made that film what it is, you know, and everybody who I spoke to said the same thing. Is, you know, he had a hand in everything: the soundtrack, the costumes, the design, everything was filtered through Joel Schumacher's eye, you know, and you can't, it's like lightning in a bottle, and no remake or anything is going to recapture that. So I can't get mad at somebody else wanting to reinterpret the source material, you know.
That's actually a really interesting take on it. You've kind of blown my mind there, because I feel like maybe not so much me, but sometimes I get drawn into, I guess, that belief that like, oh no, I don't want them to do this, or they're not going to, like what you said about they're not going to do it the same as the original. It's like, yeah, well, that's kind of the intention. I would hope they would be marketing it to X age group or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think it's just very hard for people to let go of the nostalgia, I suppose, and they see it as like a lot of times I see a lot of the Halloween purists, for example, or Michael Myers purists, you know, they give David Gordon Green and the guys at Blumhouse a lot of shit about what they're doing with the franchise now and different things. And it's like, but I mean, it hasn't, we haven't tarnished anything. It's just, you know, we're trying to reintroduce.
And the world has changed.
Yeah.
The world has changed. You can't just do a cookie cutter 1978 Halloween anymore, you know, and you can't do the, you know, overblown gore of the 80s anymore. We're just in a very, very different place, which is why, you know, I wish them all the very best with The Exorcist. But the thing with The Exorcist, the legacy and the reputation of The Exorcist, is not necessarily the film. It's the people who saw the film when it first came out and retell the hysteria that came with it. But you have to think, you know, America at that time, you know, it was Watergate, it was Vietnam, you know, there was no, they needed the Wizard of Oz more than anything at that point in history, and they got The Exorcist, and they were not ready for it. And, you know, it was new Hollywood. It was when directors ruled the studios.
Yeah.
And they got to tell the stories that they wanted to make. And they were, you know, you had filmmakers that were really pushing the envelope as to what was considered filmable at that point. And The Exorcist really took advantage of that. You know, had The Conjuring come out in 1970, like The Conjuring as it is now, had that come out in 1973, we would be saying the same thing. We would be saying exactly the same thing. It's just the fact that people saw something on screen that they'd never seen before and didn't think they would be able to ever see. Now, you know, I think from the moment we saw Robert Patrick walk through steel bars in Terminator 2, we realized that anything was possible. You know, anything we could imagine, they could put on screen. You know, and then shortly afterwards, you had dinosaurs chasing after Jeff Goldblum. You know, and you know the gloves were off. But now I kind of feel like I'm interested to see what they do with The Exorcist over Blumhouse with David Gordon Green. But I do think that it's the reputation of the original film that is more overblown than the film itself. And I say that I say that very seriously, because it's my favorite movie. You know, I told you the story about how I saw it as an 18-year-old, having seen it countless times, and it made me actually question my life choices. You know, I would be very hard pressed to think that could happen with a movie now, but I would love to be proven wrong. I would love to be proven wrong, you know. So, but we'll see.
I think that's that thing as well. You always chase when you're a fan. How difficult was it? Obviously, you've written Beware the Moon about American Werewolf, and then you've done Lost in the Shadows about The Lost Boys. How difficult is it to put together a book like that from, I guess, the initial concept of just compiling everything together, and then, you know, going through a publisher, and I don't know how it works with licensing and all that stuff then as well. How difficult is that whole process?
The licensing and everything I leave to the publishers. You know, if I come to them with the subject, then I just trust that they, you know, have the authority to take the material and sell it, you know. Beware the Moon was very easy because I still had a written, almost like a script written of the original documentary. And the intention was always to build on what was already there. And I absolutely love, and the reason I wanted to do Beware the Moon as a book was Peter Brack's Crystal Lake Memories. And I loved the way that it was put together as like a documentary on the page. So I wanted to do that for Beware the Moon in the same style. But, you know, the thing that was funny was when I'd finished Beware the Moon, like, I'm not even kidding, like almost a dozen people who I'd been looking for to interview for the documentary literally came out of the woodwork and were like, well, hey, I worked on the film too. Why don't you interview me? I was like, where were you 6 months ago? So that's kind of where that started. So I'd had the idea to do Beware the Moon as a book, like a companion book to the documentary, as far back as when the documentary came out. But it wasn't until I saw on Gary Smart, who runs Dead Mouse and Cult Screenings UK, they were about to release their Return of the Living Dead book, and he posted like a little video, a concept video of them flicking through like the first print preview version that they'd gotten from the printers, and I was just like, this is incredible. You know, I was like, who did this? It's like, we did. And I did the same thing I did with Anthony Bueno. It's like, you fans of American Werewolf in London? so I pitched it to them, and they were like, yeah, great, we'd love to do it. So, and I still had like an entire image archive from when I'd made the documentary. So images wasn't a problem, and I had all the original call sheets, and I had script pages and all kinds of material that wasn't readily available that we could use as great visuals for the piece. So I think I interviewed another 10 people on top of what I'd done for the documentary. But of course, I got to pull from the uncut, you know, footage of the documentary as well. So a lot of stories that we couldn't fit in the original doc finally made it into the book. And I did follow-up interviews with both Landis and Rick Baker to kind of fill in where I felt there were gaps. Again, like I said, when you're editing something together, you realize what you're missing. So those are the things that I kind of made mental notes of. And I was like, well, it'd be great to have John comment on this or Rick comment on this. Because the one thing that the documentary didn't have that the book does, which I'm super proud of, and I'm glad that I was able to get the story, was the pre-production process for An American Werewolf in London, specifically the makeup effects, feels very cut and paste in the documentary. It's like, hey, we got the money, and then we started making it. Which was further from the truth. Because Rick and his team of young artists who he specifically assembled for An American Werewolf in London, he'd just gotten Night Skies, which is the unmade alien horror movie that Spielberg was going to make after Raiders of the Lost Ark, and was intended to be a pseudo sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And he'd approached Rick to build fully animatronic aliens, which he did, and there was footage of these things kind of skittering across walls and all this kind of stuff. And it was the same technology that he was working on for the Jack puppet in An American Werewolf in London. So these were kind of like the prototypes, and then he took that and he put it into the puppet. So he was working on Night Skies during the day and doing all the American Werewolf stuff at night in the same facility. But the problem was, the facility was rented out by Columbia Pictures, who were doing Night Skies. And An American Werewolf in London was an independent film. because I know Universal own it now, but at the time, Landis and George Folsey, they were the sole producers on the film. They got all the money to make the movie. It wasn't a Universal or a studio picture at that time. It was an indie film. So it was non-union, and Night Skies was union. So all these kids that he'd hired to do American Werewolf couldn't work on Night Skies with him. So he left all of them to work on the werewolf stuff. And whenever a union rep showed up, they had a person sitting on a front desk who would buzz a light. They'd have to turn off all of the lights in the American Werewolf studio, and all the artists had to hide. So that when the union reps came in, all they saw was the Night Sky stuff. So, and I finally got all of Rick's makeup guys and Rick himself to talk about that, because on the documentary, he wasn't so open about it. But this was the great thing. When Rick Baker joined Twitter, he started sharing his archives, all this kind of stuff. And as soon as he showed the picture of the alien, the Night Skies alien, I was like, okay, now this feels like a gateway for me to actually ask him. Yeah. And I did, and he told the whole story. And that's the one thing that I love about the book over the documentary. And I always recommend the book over the documentary because it's the more complete story.
Quick, I guess, and there's probably other people that would like me to ask this question as well, but this is more for me. Very difficult to get those two books.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the thing. When we did Beware the Moon, I was told from the very get-go that they were always intended to be collector's pieces, so they were always going to be in a limited run. Any subsequent runs there have been after the first one has always been me saying, there's still an audience for this. Let's release some more. But the thing is, when they do release more, they only do them in like a run of 500. Right. So I can tell you that we did a reprint of Lost in the Shadows, which again, that's an interesting story how that came about, because after Beware the Moon, it's sold out its print run, the first print run, within a few weeks. So right after that, Gary Smart was like, right, better start planning the next one. And I had no intention of doing another book after that. But I went on holiday to Orlando, and at this point I was still, the body had got me signed to an agency in Hollywood, so I had all these things going on, but nothing was happening. I was writing scripts. As I said, I was writing with Steph Hutchinson. We were writing some screenplays, trying to get things made, and you get meetings with everybody, but nothing really kind of stuck. So that's why I did the books in the first place, was just to keep myself from going insane and keep myself busy. So I finally relented and started thinking about a second book. And I'd actually gotten to the planning stages of writing a book on the Poltergeist movies. And I was making a list of people who I was going to reach out to and interview. And then that night, I remember I was in the hotel room and I was doing the Excel spreadsheet, putting in all the contacts and all that kind of stuff. My fiance and I were invited to a screening of The Lost Boys at the Enzian Theatre in Orlando. And I hadn't seen it on the big screen in a long time. So I thought that'd be fun. I've never seen it with an American audience. So, I wanted to experience that because I just knew it would be like a rock show. So we went along, and the minute the Warner Brothers logo came up, and cry little sister, it's like I just got goosebumps, and the entire place just erupted. And then my fiance put her hand on my knee, and she leaned forward. She's like, "This should be your next book." And I thought about it like during the course of the movie, and I don't know if I had a couple of vodka lemonades in me afterwards, but I then decided that I'm going to do it. And the first person I reached out to was the original screenwriter, James Jeremias, who wrote the first and second draft with Jan Fisher, who sadly is no longer with us. And I had to get in touch with him through the Writers Guild, because there was no contact info for him whatsoever. So again, it was like writing an email and then they forward it on, kind of like I did with Gareth, because my biggest worry about doing The Lost Boys was with Beware the Moon. I knew everybody, and I already had the reputation through the documentary, but this was brand new. It was totally new. And I knew that it was going to be a hot potato because of, the sadness with Corey Haim, and, you know, and what happened there and the controversy with the two Coreys. So I just made it absolutely abundantly clear in every email that I sent out that my intention for the book was for it to be a celebration of the movie and the making of the movie. I'm not TMZ. I'm not interested in trash, you know. And I stuck to that. I mean, there are some juicy stories in there, but they are stories that the people that I interviewed were willing to tell me. You know, these weren't things that I prodded and pried at, because they were stories that I had no clue about. You know, it wasn't as though I asked, you know, kids shooting a Santa Cruz in '86, you know, how much was the production budget on Blow, you know, like, you know, which there would have been a Blow budget because it was an '80s in the movie. It was a movie in the '80s even. But those aren't the questions that I'm gonna ask, you know. And if people are gonna tell me that people were, you know, burning the candle at both ends, before I printed anything, I always went to the other person and said, this person said this. What is your side of the story? And then they would tell me, and I'd say, are you happy for me to include this? And they either said yes or no. So it was very, you know, once I got all the interviews and that was my process, it was a very simple yes or no process. There were very few no's though. You know, there were very, very few times did I have someone say off the record, this is what happened.
Yeah.
You know, everybody was very open. But the reason I brought it up is I have been talking to Gary because we did the reprint of Lost in the Shadows. He did say we should do one next year because it's the 35th anniversary of the movie. And I said to him, I was like, I don't just want to do another reprint of the book that is available. So I don't know if you're aware of this, and I don't know if many people are aware of this. If you've got both the softback and the hardbook back, you'd know. But for the softback, we removed a chapter that was in the hardback on the deleted scenes in the film. Because I managed to track down the original stills photographer, I had shitloads of images from scenes that weren't in the movie. So I wanted to do like the script page with stills from the scenes, because there were even deleted scenes that aren't on the DVD or Blu-ray.
Wow.
That were shot, and I had stills of. So I did this whole thing, this whole chapter on the deleted scenes, but we cut it for the softback. So I said to Gary, if we're going to do another print run for the 35th anniversary, and I'm going to give you the heads up now, it will still probably only be 500 copies. So get the pre-orders as soon as it's announced. We're going to do a legit second edition. So it's going to be called Lost in the Shadows second edition. It's going to have brand new cover artwork. We're going to reinstate the deleted scenes chapter. And I'm going to write a brand new chapter in tribute to Joel Schumacher.
Nice.
So
I love that.
I had mentioned it on another podcast, but that's the more fully formed version of what we were planning.
I can guarantee you there that everybody listening to this now is good. That's going to be something, because I had mentioned your name. I have a Discord server. There's a couple of hundred people in it, and the books came up, and their people's lack of ability, I think, to get them.
Yeah, I mean, it genuinely pains me that they are limited edition, but sadly, that's what I signed up for when I agreed to do them. And you know, it's up to the publishers if they release them. My favorite thing is when people do, when they have bought the pre-orders or they've paid for the pre-orders, when people email me asking where their book is. I'm like, I don't print them at home.
Yeah,
you know,
that's how it works.
I'm not a one-man operation. You know, there are publishers and they do all that. I just wrote it. That's my job done. You know, you don't email Stephen King after buying Carrie on Amazon Prime. It's like, when's my book turning up?
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier about after you had done the first book, Beware the Moon, you had really at one point no intentions to do a second book. Do you have those same feelings now about doing?
very much so, because my career took off after the second book. So yeah, it was 2007, end of 2017 when it came out. I mean, they were taught again. Dead Mouse were kind of trying to pry something out of me, and I would be lying if I didn't say that I had an idea for a third one if it was going to happen. But then it was December 2017 when Blumhouse bought The Body and bought our feature adaptation. And 2018 and then 2019 with the second film, I was consistently working, up until the pandemic. So, and I'm still writing for TV and screenplays now. So a third book would be, if there's another pandemic and I I lose all of my film work again, then there would be a possibility. But right now, I'm getting to do what I actually want to do.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And let's say there's not another pandemic, and maybe a couple of years down the line, maybe still is the door still open to potentially doing a third book? Because I feel like people love this style of book as well, because I think you put it perfectly in the sense of, I always found it hard to explain, but like a documentary, I guess, in print form. It's not just, I mean, we've all read books about movies, but they feel very, a lot of them can feel very generic, and it's the stuff you already know, and it's like trivia from IMDb and stuff, and it's like, I don't really, it's like a quick sell, like a £10 book. These things are like an encyclopedia about.
Yeah, and again, the big question mark for me, I think I've been lucky on both Beware the Moon and Lost in the Shadows, but I know that these books kind of live and die by the visuals that you can provide. And that's always a big question mark with regard to, what would be next. Could I get the level of imagery that I managed to get for those two? Because they've kind of set the bar very, very high. If I had a dream book that I could do, I would love to do almost like a scrapbook in the same style that was a compilation of interviews from 1973-74 when The Exorcist came out, compared to now. Not necessarily done in the same making of style, but just a compilation of then and now, because there was a lot of stories that were in the press at the time that it came out that are just absolutely batshit crazy. And I feel like Brew Freakin's probably happy that this is the case, but I feel like a lot of those stories have been forgotten in the near 50 years since it came out, and I don't feel as though we should be forgetting those stories. They're not salacious, but I just love that, when people would ask Freakin how they did the levitation, he would say, "Oh, we did it with electromagnetic fields," shit like that, because he didn't want to ruin the magic of it. But that would kind of be my dream book. I do one on The Exorcist, but the one that I have contemplated, and the one that I probably would do if I was able to, and the timing was right and the stars aligned, would be on Gremlins and Gremlins 2. That would be
the first movie that I think ever scared me. I actually I always bring this up as well. I don't know why, but I had this freakish fear of I think it's in Gremlins 2, the scene where Gizmo gets put in the drawer of the sort of a desk or whatever. I would be lying if I said that up until the age of about 16 or 17, I always had this weird, like, uncomfortable, couldn't really watch it without getting, I don't know, just uncomfortable. And I can never really pinpoint exactly why. I remember being young and seeing that, and it just freaked me out for some reason. I don't know if it's like the bullying aspect of it, or the fact that he's so vulnerable.
Or, if people can have legit fears of balloons, why can't adult humans have a fear of being shut in a drawer? I wouldn't like it.
Okay, so final few things before I let you go. What are some of your comfort horror movies, or maybe guilty pleasures? Something that's not considered, a masterpiece by the general public, but just things you like to put on every now and again.
Okay, so I don't really do guilty pleasures, because if I like it, then I don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah, it's more of a comfort horror, I think.
Yeah. Well, I did just pop in this bad boy.
That's a good choice.
I mean, it's the first time that it's been released in HD, so I kind of felt a duty to watch it. And I actually like some of the posters that I have. I mean, especially the one in my living room. It's a snap frame, so I can replace, because I that was one of my vices for a while, collecting original UK quad movie posters.
Yeah.
And I've got a shit ton of them, but I've got like 2 frames. So the Evil Dead 2 one that I've got behind me, and the one that I've got in the lounge, they're snap frames, so that I can change the posters out whenever I feel I want to change. And as soon as I finished Deadly Friend, I pulled out the Deadly Friend poster, and that's currently up in the living room, which I don't think there's probably anybody else in the UK, probably hard pressed to find in the world, that has a UK quad of Deadly Friend in their living room. But it'll live there until Christmas, and then maybe Black Christmas will go up. So Deadly Friend, yes, definitely. I just watched, and I can see the problems with it, and I can see where the studio interfered. I think it's quite charming, but it is, by all accounts, it's a pretty bad film. And I can't just defend it from the fact that it's Wes Craven, because we are talking about a director who had a dog have a flashback in a movie. So, even Wes had his dodgy moments.
Yeah, for sure.
What else? I mean, I don't like the film, but Exorcist 2 is a fucking great drinking game. Seriously, whenever somebody says something stupid, you have to drink, and you will be paralytic in 10 minutes, I guarantee. I don't know, really. I mean, again, I think, I don't know if this was when we were talking before. Yeah, it was, because we were talking about Jeepers Creepers. I found my sensibilities towards horror, not necessarily just horror, but I just think some of the horror movies that I grew up liking, I just think my patience has waned with a few of them as I've gotten older, especially as I've become a filmmaker as well, because nobody sets out to make a bad movie, and I will never ever, the last thing you will ever hear me do is shit on a film. I might say something privately, that I didn't like this and this is why, but I will never say that was the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. That filmmaker should be ashamed of that kind of stuff, because I know how hard it is to make a movie. Yeah. Nobody sets out to make a bad movie. So when bad movies happen, it's upsetting's a bit strong, but it's, I feel bad for the people who worked on it, because a lot of people work on movies, and and I kind of feel like the movies that I know in my heart of hearts are bad. I prefer the memory of them rather than and that's not to say that I don't own these movies, because I do. I've got like a movie collection that's almost 6,000 strong, and a lot of those movies I probably won't watch again, but I still have them because I never learn.
I'm probably halfway to closing in on that, and I just feel like every time I try and tell myself I'm going to stop now, that I'm done with this, and then it's like, ooh, okay, maybe just a few more, maybe just one more. And
I tend to pay more attention to the movies that I watch now that I do love, and a lot of my like you asked me about comfort horror movies. Dawn of the Dead, easily I can just put that on in the background. I can be doing something completely different, I can just hear the movie, and the images are in my head. I don't even have to watch it. Carrie as well. I just watched Carrie the other night doing my De Palma filmography. That movie's actually my lucky rabbit's foot. I have to watch it. It's my own little superstition. I have to watch it the night before I start shooting a new project, because there's a wonderful story in it, and I'll try and tell it as quickly as I can. Basically, when they were shooting the prom sequence, it was one shot. If you go back and watch it, it's one shot where PJ Souls comes out from the crowd and collects the ballots from the table, and then the camera follows her, and she meets her boyfriend Freddie, and they do the little switcheroo with the fake ballots, and she drops the real ones and kicks them under the stage, and then the camera trails along the edge of the stage, and you see Nancy Allen and John Travolta under the through the curtains under the stairs, and then the camera keeps going around, and then it does a rack focus onto the Amy Irving comes from behind the stage, so we see her, and then the camera starts to pan up on a crane. It's all still one shot from starting at Tommy and Carrie's table. It's gone all the way along on a dolly. Amy Irving comes in, it rack focuses to the rope, which then pans up on a crane. It then swivels around, revealing the bucket, and just as the announcer announces Tommy and Carrie as the king and queen, the camera then pushes past the bucket, and it's back on the table where the shot started. And De Palma called it the figure of eight shot, and he said that when he knew it was going to take all day just to do that one shot, which is a luxury any independent filmmaker would love. Because I shot both the body, I shot that in 18 days, and I shot Uncanny Annie in 16 days, which is very ambitious. But anyway, when they were doing that sequence, that was the day that the execs from United Artists decided to come and visit the set, and he was just doing this really elaborate shot and they didn't even start filming it. I think they started at 9 a.m. and by 5 p.m. they just choreographed it and were getting ready to shoot it, and the execs were absolutely livid.
I can imagine.
Absolutely livid. And De Palma was like, well, what, do you just want a couple of close-ups and all this kind of stuff? Do you want to do it? It's like, leave me alone. And I always remember that story going into a new project, just to be true to your vision. That make something, if something's necessary, then it needs to be a hill to die on. And that story always reminds me of that, and that's why I always have to watch the movie before I shoot something. So
I think that would definitely differentiate in any aspect, whether it be maybe some of the stuff that you've pushed to have in books or movies or shorts or whatever. I definitely do think that people who really love these things, you can see those things are set apart.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And again, I respect every individual role on a movie. I mean, even like the Newtons, who are the great composers who did Haunting of Hill House, they do all of Mike Flanagan stuff. I was very lucky to get them on the Blumhouse version of The Body. And I asked them if I could come and sit in on the composition sessions, and they just thought I was weird. They were like, it's going to be very, very boring. I was like, yeah, but I'm just fascinated, and I love watching people do what they are good at. It's like sitting in on the sound mix, and like people just weren't used to the director sitting there and thought that I would be just giving notes every 10 seconds. But it's just because I just love it. I love watching skilled people do what they were born to do. And I genuinely feel, and again, this isn't me shitting on everybody else's job, but I feel that the best horror movies are because of the directors. 100%. Because look how many adaptations of Carrie we've had. The De Palma one is the one that we think of because he was a master of what he does. He knows how to tell a chilling story, and he knows suspense, and he knows how to build a suspenseful movie. You didn't get that in the Angela Bettis version. You didn't get that in the Chloe Grace Moretz version. again, I don't think The Exorcist would be the movie that it is if it wasn't for Friedkin. I don't think The Shining would be what it is without Kubrick. You know, I think that these are the core elements of what makes those movies special, you know, because we have had various adaptations of Carrie and The Shining, and as much as, you know, I love people like Mick Garris and stuff like that, you know, their job was to make something that was more faithful to the source material, whereas Kubrick was making a cinematic journey into madness, which Stephen King would argue against, but it's still one of the greatest. I mean, I've got my own little tribute on the door behind me. It's one of the few films that still scares me to this day, and it's because the movie doesn't have any rules.
I also have I don't know if you can make that out there.
I'm seeing it. Yeah, Red Rum. Nice. I just booked a 7-hour tattoo session for next Tuesday. I'm having a sleeve started on this arm. So
yeah, have you got all your ideas lined out and stuff?
Yeah, well, I only went in to in fact, I've got it here. I only went in to consult with the artist about having this. If you can see that, let me see if I can turn this off. Hang on. See that?
Yeah.
Little pumpkin.
Yeah.
There we go. So that was designed by Mike McCash, who is one of the most shit hot tattoo guys for movies. So he did all Mickey Rourke's tattoos in Iron Man 2 and all that kind of stuff. He was one of my special effects prosthetic artists on the body, because one of my dear friends is Aaron Kruger McCash, who is one of the producers and Emmy award-winning makeup artist, makeup designer on American Horror Story and all that kind of stuff. And it was one of those things like, if you make something, I'm going to come and work on it for you. So I called her bluff and I said, Erin, I'm making a movie and you're going to come do the makeup. And she did. You know, we couldn't afford her, but she did. And Mike came along and we wanted to have you seen the Blumhouse version?
Yeah.
So in the party sequence, there's like a montage of like just the most outrageous things that you can imagine at a Halloween party happening. And one of them is a young lady who was played by Carly Herbert, who was, again, one of the key makeup artists on the film, having a tattoo done on her back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was this little guy that Mike designed. So I said when I finished the movie that I would get it done. And I finally booked it in for Tuesday, but I originally was only just going to get a consultation for that. But I brought along some other ideas that I mentioned to the artist. And he said, what time have I got you coming in? I was like, 12. And he looked on the schedule and he was like, well, the cancellation that I had that I'm fitting you in for was an all-dayer. So should we just do it all? I was like, how long is that? It's like 12 till 6. I was like, I can go as long as you can. So I have a 7-hour session.
We need to see the results of that.
Well, I've already got one piece in there, which is Ben Gardner's head from Jaws.
Oh yeah.
In the frame. So the pumpkin is going to come up around here, and then I've got a couple of other bits that will be added to that on Tuesday as well, which were literally ideas that I thought of on the day. And then he was like, well, we can position this here and this here. And I was like, okay, that looks pretty cool. I was like, and you can do it all in one day? It's like, yeah.
That escalated fast.
Yeah, a little bit. So did the price.
Yeah, I'd imagine. So I would probably be killed if I don't ask this question before I let you go. A lot of people ask for, advice for somebody following their passion, whether it be writing, directing, different things like that. And a lot of questions surrounding dealing with naysayers, I suppose, whether it be friends, family members, maybe that are kind of like, are you really going to be a director? Are you really going to make movies? Are you really going to write for X, Y, and Z, establishment? Is there any advice that you would give, or did you ever find yourself having to deal with that?
Ironically, yeah, my own parents, because at the time I had, this is Beware the Moon, I had so many kind of pipe dreams, and I would say to them constantly, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and never followed up on it. which is why Beware the Moon was such a big change in that chain, to the point where I didn't actually tell my parents until we kind of got Landis on board, and so I'd shot like 4 or 5 interviews at this point, and they had no clue, didn't tell them. So the first piece of advice would be just to ignore the naysayers, man. You're the one who wants to do it. I mean, if you need someone's approval to go and get a drink of water, then it's the same thing. You do what you tell yourself that you need to do to have some kind of joy and fulfillment in this life. We're not here for a very long time, so if you can make the most out of it and do what you want to do, as long as nobody else gets hurt, then yeah, absolutely go for it. But I'll ask you the same question. This is what I'll end on. I will ask you the same question that John Landis asked me. The first question he asked me when I said about wanting to be a filmmaker, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "What is a director? To you, what is a director?"
The visionary, the person that makes it all come together.
I said something similar, and he went, "No." He said, "A director is someone who makes a movie." And from that moment, I was like, "Yeah, I get it. You just got to do it." There are ways that you can network. There are film festivals and stuff like that, and that's when you meet the people that you can send stuff to if they are willing to read it. But those are your opportune moments to kind of give your elevator pitches.
So I know coming up, you're currently in pre-production on a couple of things, right?
I'm don't believe the IMDb. The thing on there, I think it's Endangered Species. I've been in development on for about 5 years now. It's a great script. Stephanie Jeffs is a wonderful writer, but it's a pretty beefy film, and I think that it's a project that I think I need to make something else until I can get the kind of budget that movie needs to be made realistically, because it's an epic story. It's essentially the clash of and I think maybe The Mandalorian's probably throwing some shade on it now, because it's essentially Lone Wolf and Cub, but with a vampire looking after a human baby during the middle of a zombie apocalypse.
Which just sounds amazing.
It's a really fun story. And I really kind of go to town on, the kind of things that I would like to see in an interaction for, zombies and vampires. So of course there's zompires at one point, what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses, kind of figuring out the rules. So that was fun. But yeah, I'm currently, I've got a wonderful producer called Pascal Degoe, who used to run Goldcrest in London. And he, in the early noughties, late 90s, he used to run Luc Besson's company, EuropaCorp. I've known him for a while. He produced a movie called Slumber that came out a few years ago, which ironically was edited by the guy who cut The Body short as well, Gary Forrester, who I'm again dying to make a movie with again. But Pascal and I have a couple of things, not just feature, but also TV, and also dabbling in scripted podcasts as well. So I've been keeping busy during the pandemic, but it's mostly been writing. It's only been like the past month or so that the promise of actual production work has started to come back. So
is there anything you would like anybody to check out, plug, promote, anything like that?
No, just, if you've got any listeners that are in the US and have Hulu, then please watch my 2 episodes of Into the Dark, The Body and Uncanny Annie. They were both really fun to make. Uncanny Annie was a bit bittersweet because I had to give up the film a week into edit, the first week of editing, because my mum passed away very, very, very suddenly. And I was in Los Angeles at the time, so I had to fly back to London and kind of deal with that, and just kind of left the movie for the execs to kind of finish. But you know, it was 90% of what I intended it to be. I wanted to make like an old-fashioned, you know, slumber party film that 14-year-old girls discover. You know, that was my intention, but with a lot more swearing in it. There's a lot more F-bombs than like a traditional kind of tween horror movie, but that was kind of the intention, because it's Jumanji with a horror sensibility. So
very, very good.
Yeah, so I always wanted to kind of stay true to that. And the body, I just think in fact I just read I got sent a novel manuscript for a book that hasn't come out yet, but they're already looking at the prospect of adapting it, and I got sent it because the body is kind of like the perfect audition piece for what this is. So I just finished it today, and I've told the producers that I want to make it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, we'll see how that one goes. That one I'm pretty excited about.
Hopefully we can do it again in 2022, and maybe I'll have some more stuff on the cards that you can talk about. I know sometimes it can be, especially I guess post-pandemic as well, things are only really starting to come together again, so it's hard to talk about.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, it's if you think about it, with Hollywood starting up again, they're literally going back and resuming where they were when it started. So there's not a lot of new stuff that's kind of being bought, but that's slowly starting to happen again. So
it's been an absolute pleasure and honor. I appreciate you taking all the time that you've taken. I have one final question that I ask everybody, is why horror, and what does it mean to you?
Because I am a huge scaredy cat in real life. No, not really. No, it's hard to explain. If you'd have asked me that 20 years ago, I probably would have given you that answer, because, you know, the cliche of it's the roller coaster, it's being scared in a controlled environment, and I love that. Now, because again, you know, when you make horror movies, you can see where a scare's coming a mile off. So when a film actually does scare you, that's a really cool, rare thing these days. I don't know why horror. I'm fascinated with, because I'm a ghost hunter as well. I dabble in parapsychology, so living people scare me a lot more than dead people do. You know, I just went to a wedding 2 weekends ago, and with the party of people that I went with, I was the one that was tasked with finding the accommodation. Of course, I picked the 17th century haunted inn, you know, so which I didn't tell everybody else until we got there, which was great. One of my friends, he's like the biggest fucking guy you ever met. He slept with the light on the first night. Yeah, I can't explain it. I can't explain what it is about horror movies, but I've always had a morbid fascination with the dark side, I guess. And I guess it raises questions about the human condition and what is beyond comprehension and what we understand in terms of the waking world. You know, what is waiting for us on the other side. It's fear of the unknown, I guess. It just comes back to the cliche, the fear of the unknown.
Yeah, I feel like that answer as well can change from time to time. Like you said, you know, even with your maybe taste in certain movies or what you really like and don't like, it can really change depending on life experience. I
think it's the same obsession with true crime that we've got right now.
Yeah,
it's exactly the same thing. You know, people want to peek beyond. It's like standing on a ledge and looking down.
Yeah, that's true.
It's exactly what it is. You know, it's being in a. I just keep going back to the same fucking cliche. You know, but
you're right.
You know, you're standing on a ledge, but you're holding on. You know,
it's like getting right there, but not.
Yeah, and just, you know, putting yourself in a position where you think to yourself, "What happens if I let go right now?" Which then just scares you even more. you know, it's not just reveling in what's in front of you, but it's imagining yourself being in that position.
Yeah. I see myself getting drawn into that true crime thing to the point where I go on these deep dives of like all these strange, mysterious things that happen in national parks in the States and stuff that I never would have said I'm interested in. And now somehow I've been like pulled into that, and it's like in the zeitgeist now, and everybody's talking about it, and it's like a big thing.
I've kind of got some of the Netflix ones on in the background as I'm like trying to drift off to sleep. I just rewatched. This is a big mistake because I wasn't falling asleep to it because I'm just completely enthralled by it, and I can never watch or take Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer seriously again, because the Confession Killer documentary on Netflix just basically outright says, yeah, he probably only killed his mum.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, no one wants to see Michael Rooker in that role.
Yeah, no, the other version. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking all the time as well. The links for all of Paul's work will be below. No, I will not have any links to some special place to get the books, because I know lots of people are going to ask me that.
eBay. That's all I can say. eBay.
Yeah,
I know the prices are through the roof, but
unfortunately. Like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the best. Have a good Christmas, New Year, and hopefully we'll talk again in 2022.
Thank you. You too. And I would love to. That'd be great. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.